Hi everybody, we're on page 4 of the student note packet. We are looking at notes for 6.2. We're going to talk about the trig functions, and then what we'll do is we'll get to some of the examples on the bottom of that page. What we don't finish in this lecture, you guys will finish as part of your homework, and then you'll get to the bookwork. So think back to AS Algebra 2 last year. You guys did a unit on trig. It was chapter 9, and there were 6 trig functions that we used. So just as a reminder of what those look like, sine, cosine, tangent, hopefully that's not new, should have seen it in geometry and algebra 2. But then we've got these other 3, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. And we can abbreviate them with what you guys see on the right-hand column there. But let's imagine I'm going to draw a triangle where r is my hypotenuse, x is the side adjacent to theta, and y is the side opposite. Then we can define sine as y over r, always opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine we can define as x over r, always adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is always y over x, opposite over adjacent. Now remember, that comes from SOHCAHTOA, geometry. Sine is the side opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is the side adjacent over the hypotenuse. And tangent is the side opposite over adjacent. Now, secant, when we think about secant, cosecant, and cotangent, we're going to define secant as 1 over the cosine of theta or the reciprocal of cosine. So that will be r over x. Cosecant is 1 over the sine of theta. That's going to be r over y. And then cotan, that's the reciprocal of tangent. So that is going to be x over y. Now, cotan is easy to remember that that's the reciprocal of tangent. If you ever forget secant and cosecant, what the difference is between those two or which one they're the reciprocal of, one way I like to think about it is when we pair up these 3 original trig functions with their reciprocal, only one in each pair can start with a C. So cosine always starts with a C, which means it must be paired with secant. Sine does not start with a C, which means it must be paired with cosecant. And then the same rule applies for tangent as well. So only one of those starts with a C also, but it's just easier to remember tangent. All right, so secant is the reciprocal of cosine, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. All right, so taking a look at the first example at the bottom of page 4, we're going to plot this ordered pair, and then we're going to find the 6 trig functions, their values. So 7, -3, I've already got the quadrant here. We're going to be in quadrant 4, and I'm really just going to sketch this point. All right, so the value along the x-axis needs to be a little bit bigger than the value along the y. So maybe that's 7, -3. I'm just going to label that, and you guys can just sketch this point right next to the number 1. Doesn't have to be super big. Okay, but there's my point. I'm going to extend an angle out, and then I'm going to drop a perpendicular to the x-axis in order to create my triangle here. Now, when we drop perpendiculars, we will always go to the x-axis. So no matter what quadrant we're in, we're always going to go back to the x-axis on those perpendiculars. If you drop it to the y-axis, you're going to find some issues. So never drop to the y, always drop to the x-axis there. Okay, and now I can label these a little bit more clearly. The side adjacent to theta is 7, opposite theta is -3. Now we need one more thing, which is our hypotenuse, and we can use Pythagorean theorem in order to do that, right? A squared plus b squared is equal to, so 7 squared plus -3 squared is equal to our hypotenuse squared. All right, so r squared is equal to 49 plus 9, so 58, which means our hypotenuse is the square root of 58. Because we're dealing with our trig unit, we're representing that hypotenuse as a length. We don't have to worry about the plus or minus. We're always going to take the positive because it's a distance. Okay, so sine then is always the side opposite over the hypotenuse, so -3 over the square root of 58. The problem is that is not rationalized, so we always want to make sure that we rationalize our final answers. You can never leave a radical in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by root 58 over root 58. So our final answer is negative 3 root 58 over 58. All right, if you can do that in your head, you don't need to worry too much about showing me the work there. All right, so cosine then is adjacent over hypotenuse. That is 7 over the square root of 58. That, again, I have to rationalize. We're going to multiply everything by the square root of 58 over the square root of 58. When I rationalize, we get 7 root 58 over 58. Tangent's a little bit nicer. We've got opposite over adjacent here, so negative 3 over 7 is the final answer. Cosecant. Remember, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Now, the original value for sine is negative 3 over the square root of 58. So if I just switch the numerator and denominator there, I get something that's already rationalized. So I can leave my final answer like that. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start with what the original value we found for cosine was, which was 7 over the square root of 58. And then I will swap the numerator and the denominator. And then cotan, I prefer to think about cotan in terms of x and y instead. So cotan is x over y, so 7 over negative 3. All right, so you guys are going to do that for the remaining problems. I do want to work through number 3 with you guys, and then I'll have you finish 2 and 4 on your own. So number 3 looks like this. We've got fractions. That might be the only thing that makes it slightly more complicated. So I'm just going to do a sketch of the point 1/6, 1/8 first. All right, so 1/6, 1/8, it really doesn't have to be like super accurate. But I'm just going to plot that point, extend a ray to make my angle, and then I'm going to drop a perpendicular down to the x-axis. All right, the x-coordinate here is 1/6. The y-coordinate here is 1/8. And that's what gets me to the point 1/6, 1/8. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is find r before I can find all 6 trig values. So we're going to do that using Pythagorean theorem. R is equal to the square root of 1/6 squared plus 1/8 squared. And I'm just going to work through this. So this is the square root of 1 over 36 plus 1 over 64. Now I'm going to do this without having to do big numbers, or I'm going to try. So this is going to become the square root. If I want to find a common denominator, this is going to be 64 over 36 times 64 is going to be my common denominator, plus 36. So I multiply the first term by 64 over 64, the second term by 36 over 36. My common denominator then is 36 times 64. I don't want to worry about doing that in my head, so I'm going to see if things kind of work out. So on the top we have 100, and I can separate out the square roots to make it top and bottom. And on the bottom we have the square root of 36 times 64. So the square root of 100 is 10. And now on the bottom I can also separate out the square roots like this. So I'm going to get 10 over 6 times 8. All right, that is going to be 10 over 48, which is going to simplify to 5 over 24. So the radius or the hypotenuse there is 5 over 24. Okay, so sine then. Sine is always y over the hypotenuse, so 1/8 over 5 over 24. You're never going to leave me with an answer that looks like that. So we are going to simplify. I'm going to do rainbow math, which means 24 goes on the top, and then 8 times 5 goes on the bottom. And we will simplify that to 3 over 5. And then cosine is going to be x over r. So x is going to be 1/6 over 5 over 24. So again, I'm going to simplify that. Top is 24. The bottom is 6 times 5. So 24 over 30. And then I'm going to simplify that. That's going to be 8/10, which simplifies to 4/5. Tangent is y over x. So in this case, we're going to have 6 over 8, which is going to simplify to 3 over 4. And then cosecant, secant, and cotan, I'm just going to use reciprocals. So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So that is going to be 3/5. Secant will be the reciprocal of cosine, which will be 5/4. Excuse me, cosecant should be 5/3. Reciprocal there. And then cotan, lastly, is going to be the reciprocal of tangent, so 4/3 is going to be cotan. And no work to show there, really, because we know they're reciprocals of one another. Okay, so you guys are going to finish up 2 and 4, and then there is book work that goes along. You're going to do the book work just like the way that we did the problems in the lecture. Just sketch a diagram first and show your work for finding the hypotenuse. The other thing that's assigned with this assignment is the next page in the student note packet, which is pages 5 and 6. It's a sinusoid graphing intro handout. You guys are going to use a calculator in order to fill out this table. And then what you guys are going to do is just follow all of the directions for the graphing portion. And then there's questions at the very bottom of page 5. And then you'll do the same thing on the back. So that's just a handout to get us introduced or kind of reviewing graphing signs, because you guys should have done this last year. But email me if you have questions. Those two things together make up a portion of block 1 homework.